If this decision stands, it could quietly reshape the entire 2026 economic landscape. And Donald Trump may have just made the worst possible move in response. Because instead of de escalating after a major tariff ruling, he doubled down. And that's where things get dangerous. Tonight, we're breaking down what the court actually decided, why this ruling matters far more than most headlines suggest, and how Trump's reaction may have turned a legal setback into a full blown economic risk. Stay with me because the last part of this story is what markets are really watching. Let's start with the ruling itself. A federal trade court reviewed the legality of key tariffs imposed under executive authority, tariffs that were justified on national security grounds. For years, these tariffs have targeted strategic imports: steel, aluminum, and a wide range of manufactured goods. Supporters call them protective. Critics called them inflationary, but the legal question wasn't about policy preference. It was about authority. Did the executive branch stretch emergency trade powers beyond their intended scope? The court's answer was subtle, but significant. It didn't strike down the entire tariff framework, but it did narrow the interpretation of how far those emergency powers can go without additional congressional oversight. And that changes the playing field because tariffs under emergency authority operate fast. Congressional tariffs operate slow, and speed is leverage. Now, here's why this matters politically. Trump's economic brand is built on strength, especially trade strength. He framed tariffs as proof that America could no longer be taken advantage of. He framed them as negotiating tools, as pressure points, as economic weapons. But when a court limits that flexibility, it doesn't just create a legal complication. It creates a perception problem. And perception in politics is power. So, what did Trump do? Instead of signaling recalibration, instead of saying, we'll work within the ruling, he attacked the ruling publicly, aggressively. He framed it as judicial interference, as activist obstruction, as another example of what he calls a broken system. And that's where analysts say the mistake may have happened. Because markets don't just react to policy, they react to stability. When a former and potentially future president signals that he may challenge or sidestep judicial limits, investors hear uncertainty, trade partners hear unpredictability, and corporations hear risk. Now let's zoom out. Tariffs are not abstract policy tools. They directly affect supply chains, manufacturing input costs, consumer prices, automotive production, construction materials, technology components. If tariff authority becomes legally unstable, companies can't plan long term. And when companies can't plan long term, they freeze investment. That's the part that rarely makes headlines, but it's the part CEOs care about. And here's where it escalates. Several major trade partners immediately responded to the rhetoric, not the ruling, but the rhetoric. Officials signaled they are reviewing countermeasures, not implementing yet, reviewing. That's diplomatic language for we're watching. Now remember, we're already in a sensitive global trade environment. Supply chains remain fragile. Energy markets remain tight. Currency markets remain volatile. Adding tariff uncertainty into that mix is like adding fuel to a smoldering fire. It doesn't explode instantly. It destabilizes gradually. And gradual instability is harder to see, but more expensive over time. Now let's talk about the political calculation. Why double down? Why escalate? The answer may not be economic. It may be electoral. Tariffs poll well among certain voter blocs. They signal toughness. They signal economic nationalism. They signal confrontation with foreign competitors. In campaign terms, challenging the court may energize supporters who already distrust federal institutions. But here's the gamble: what energizes a base can spook the middle. Independent voters don't typically track trade law details, but they do notice higher prices. They do notice stock volatility. They do notice economic headlines that use words like uncertainty and legal challenge. And if markets interpret Trump's reaction as a sign of future policy volatility, that narrative could stick. Now, here's the deeper issue few are discussing. If executive tariff authority becomes a legal battlefield, future administrations, Republican or Democrat, may face tighter limits, which means Congress regains leverage. And Congress moves slower, much slower. So the long term effect of this clash may not just impact Trump, it may permanently reshape presidential trade power. And if that happens, this moment becomes bigger than a headline. It becomes structural. Let's also address the word being thrown around online: fatal. Is this politically fatal? Not necessarily. Trump has survived legal controversies before. He has turned legal challenges into political rallies. He thrives on confrontation. But this time, the variable isn't only legal, it's economic. And economics is less forgiving than politics. Markets don't respond to rhetoric loyalty, they respond to risk models. And risk models hate unpredictability. So, what happens next? There are three possible paths. First, appeal and recalibrate. The legal fight continues, but messaging softens. Markets stabilize. Second, escalation. Rhetoric intensifies. Trade partners prepare countermeasures. Volatility increases. Third, congressional intervention. Lawmakers attempt to clarify tariff authority legislatively. That process would be messy, slow, and politically explosive. Right now, we're between option one and option two, and the tone of the next 30 days will matter more than the ruling itself. Here's the quiet but critical takeaway: the ruling limited power. Trump's response amplified tension. The markets are now watching which force dominates: legal restraint or political escalation. If escalation wins, businesses delay investment. If restraint wins, stability returns. That's the fork in the road. And here's the part no one wants to say out loud: trade wars are easy to start rhetorically. They are hard to unwind structurally. Because once companies adjust supply chains, they rarely reverse quickly. Once retaliatory tariffs hit, they rarely disappear overnight. So if this moment triggers even a small spiral, the economic consequences could outlast the campaign cycle. That's what makes this so high stakes. This isn't just about one ruling, it's about executive authority, judicial boundaries, market psychology, and election year incentives colliding at the same time. And when law, politics, and economics collide, volatility follows. So, was this a fatal error? It depends on which arena we're talking about. Politically, it may energize. Economically, it may destabilize. Legally, it may redefine the limits of power. But one thing is certain: this ruling didn't end the tariff fight. It just moved it to a more unpredictable battlefield. And unpredictability is the one thing global markets fear most. We'll be watching the appeals, the diplomatic signals, and the market reaction closely, because the real impact of this moment won't be decided by headlines. It will be decided by what happens next.